What is up, Zion Youth? Welcome to another continuation of the series No Regrets, where we're just talking about relationships and having no regrets within relationships. I think it's really good to talk about that, whether it is marriage or dating or friendships or family, right? All these relationships are so important. A lot of what I've been learning lately is, man, the way that we treat one another is so important to God. So it's important that we know how to do all these relationships. And I think it can be fun to talk about. Just to get us started out, I want us to think about if you can predict the future. I want you to honestly ask yourself, can you predict the future? And unless you're like some cool, crazy superhero person, the answer is going to be no. You cannot predict the future. And there's a scripture that reminds me of this. In James chapter 4, it says, "You do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes." And I think this scripture is really important when we talk about dating, right? That we don't know what tomorrow will bring, so we have to date like we don't know what tomorrow will bring. Meaning that we need to protect our future. It matters how we date, right? I don't want us to think about who we date right now. I want us to start thinking about how we date, and how we date should be protecting our future. Right? It is important that we make decisions not only for now, but for the future. And I think that's what this scripture can be talking about, is that, man, we are protecting our future. The choices that we make, the things that we do, and the things that we don't do within relationships are so important, because the choices that we make now impact our future. Right? If we are intimate with somebody, or if we cross a boundary or a line, or we say something like "I love you" or "I want to marry you," and then in the future that doesn't happen, or you're intimate with somebody but then that is not your future spouse, man, that's not really protecting your future. So we got to go back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago of guarding your heart. Mishmar is the Hebrew way of saying that, but we need to be protecting our future. That is how we date, because the future is unpredictable. Anything can happen. I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but I gotta be real with you, right? We don't know the future, right? And how you date affects who you become, right? That's important. How you date affects who you become. And I just want to talk a little bit about how you handle conflict, right? Because inevitably there's gonna be conflict in relationships, whether it's marriage, right? Like, it's not gonna be perfect when you're married. When you're dating, there's gonna be conflict. In friendships, there's gonna be conflict in family. There's gonna be conflict, and we need to know how to handle that conflict, right? And the way that we deal with conflict now is affecting our future too, right now. Like, we might not know what our future looks like, but like I said, the choices that we make do affect our future. Right? And maybe we can start to identify things in our life, maybe these big things where this girlfriend or boyfriend cheated on you, or they've been abusive to you, or just emotionally abusive, or they don't fight fair, or they don't love well, right? Like these big things, or maybe there's these small things, that there's these red flags is another way of saying it, that there's all these red flags that are bringing conflict, but it's just not working out. And there's a scripture that I want us to be mindful within this subject of conflict, and it's found in Song of Solomon chapter 2 verse 15. It says, "Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom." And in this scenario, right, the vineyard workers, right, they're working really hard to get fruit to be able to make wine with, right? But then the foxes come in and destroy all of their hard work, that they are trying to do that, but the foxes just screw it all up. But here's the thing. They were all watching out for big foxes because they can see them and they're very, very noticeable. But the thing that actually screwed up the whole operation, that got in the way of the vineyard, was the small foxes. And we want to talk about this, right, because it's the same with conflict, right? We might think it's the big things, and that's part of the equation too, that can wreck our relationships and wreck our lives. But we have to be conscious of the small foxes, of the small conflicts, the small red flags within our relationships, because we're all about protecting our future, right? It's not that we're not willing to work on conflict and we're expecting people to be perfect, but what I want you to start to notice and be aware of and look out for are these red flags, these small foxes that can destroy the whole relationship. That things that you don't notice or that don't stick out. I think it's important that we have that we look to that there's things in these relationships that can eventually ruin everything. And here's how I want to end this. There's a scripture in 1 Timothy 4 verse 12. It says, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, in purity." And here's the thing. There are people who look at you and they say, you're young, you're going to make stupid decisions. You're going to mess up. It's going to happen. That you are too young, and you're almost like what they're kind of saying but not saying is that you're too young and you're too dumb to be able to make decisions. But here's what God is speaking to you. God is literally speaking to you today, and He's saying, you know what, you may be young, but I don't see that as a disqualification for you to make good choices for your future. Right? God is looking at you and He's saying, I think you are capable of making an example, right? That's what it says in the scripture. You are able to be example in speech and love and in faith, in purity and conduct, right? Like you get to set that example, and you get to set that example with your boyfriends and your girlfriends and your friends and your families. Like all of these relationships that you are in, you get to set this example, this expectation. So don't wait till you're 40 to protect your future. Start today. Start being an example in speech and conduct and love and faith and in purity today. Do not wait till you are 40 to start practicing that, because we need to guard our future. And a way that we can do that is actually being selective in who we date and how we date. Right? That is your conduct, right? Like who you date and how you date is your conduct. Your love is, are you willing to sacrifice in relationships? And we see this, the greatest example is Jesus, right? He put Himself before us. He loved us and He sacrificed. So in your relationships, man, do you have that? That's how you date, right? Because how you date is who you become. You're willing to sacrifice your own ego in dating, right? Or how about this faith stuff, right? It talks about that in 1 Timothy. Right? And this is seeing your relationship from God's point of view, from His will and from His way, not your will, not your way. Would God be okay with the things that you're doing in your relationship, right? Like that's a good question to ask yourself. Is God good with what you're doing right now in your friendships and your dating relationships? Or is He's sending some like, dude, I wouldn't be doing that, or that person really is not good for you. That person is toxic, and it's actually making your relationship with God way worse. And lastly is purity. Man, we can start practicing and being an example of purity. Right? And a way of saying that is if you don't work on your heart, right? Because purity is so much more than just action, right? It's so much more than just sleeping with somebody or going too far with somebody. We always jump to the extremes, but really purity starts in the heart and internally inside us. So how is your heart? Man, are you working on your heart? Do you have control of your heart, or does your heart have control of you?